My name is Germ. This is Germ Warfare, the battle of ideas. I love that intro. It's so pertinent. We are in an invisible war, as Dr. Lee Merritt said on my podcast a few weeks ago. And Rainer Filmich, would you agree that we are in a war?
I think yes. There's no doubt about that. In fact, it's just, you're right, it's an invisible war, but we can all see it and feel it.
I just want to ask you quickly, before we get into our icebreaker, is it Phil Mitch or is it Phil Mich? Because here in South Africa, we've got a little bit of German and Dutch origin, so we like the ich.
Yeah, well, it's the softer ich. It's für mich. But since I spent so much time in Japan and in the United States, nobody was able to pronounce it that way, so it's Filmich.
Yeah, and the Americans also struggle with the ich, but so they just go with the ich. Okay, so we'll for the sake of our audience, we'll say Rainer Filmich.
Yeah, that's simpler.
Okay, so
serves its purpose.
I hope you don't mind. I have a scotch because at this time of history, I think a scotch is very needed.
That's a really good idea. I'm going to do the same. You know, some of the viewers of our sessions have sent me a bottle. I once said, I definitely need a glass of whiskey. 2 days later, I got a bottle of scotch from one of our viewers.
All right, so to my South African audience, I need a bottle of scotch or Jack Daniels. I'll go with the bourbon any day. So it's been a few months, Rainer, since you were on my podcast. You are without a doubt one of the most demanded guests to come back. You've got something of a cult following here in South Africa. And I think you've got a cult following around the world because you're fighting a battle, Rainer, that is very big.
It's not just myself. It's
yes.
We're fighting on two fronts. One is strictly the legal level, which is what but others, dozens of other attorneys worldwide are doing. We're suing because we want as many courts of law as possible to tell us precisely why the PCR test doesn't do what Dr. Drosten, or he isn't even a doctor, he's a fake. Professor Drosten, he's not even a real professor. What he told the world through the WHO, it's a false statement of fact. So we're trying to get as many court decisions as possible. We're lucky because the day before yesterday, we got another one from a Vienna court in Austria. And but the ultimate goal is, of course, to sue those who are responsible for damages, and that is only possible. Yeah. In those Anglo-American countries. And the other job I have is, of course, the one with the Berlin Corona Investigative Committee, which turned out to be a platform which in the end is evidently collecting evidence for these lawsuits inadvertently.
So okay, right, so let's quickly just go back a little bit, Ryan, if you don't mind. For those who A, aren't aware of who you are, and B, our last conversation. So let's just go back. What is it that you're doing?
I have two jobs. My real job, my daytime job, so to speak, is I'm a lawyer, and I've been a trial lawyer for 26 years now. My firm and I, with some of the people working for me for 20 years now, we have been representing consumers and small and medium-sized businesses against fraudulent corporations, both here in Germany and, as I'm also admitted to the bar, in California. I've done a little bit of work. I don't have a lot of courtroom experience, but I've done a little bit of work in the United States as well. And because of this experience, in particular with Deutsche Bank, which is one of the most criminal organizations in this world, I wasn't completely surprised at what was unfolding before our eyes in the context of Corona, except this time it's not just one fraudulent corporation, but it's dozens and dozens of fraudulent corporations, plus the politicians whom they managed to get under their control. So this is my other job, the Corona Investigative Committee in Berlin, which my friend and colleague Viviane Fischer and two other attorneys founded on July 10th of last year.
Now, I mean, this this battle against the WHO and the derivatives, I mean, this isn't even about money anymore. Even if it were, it wouldn't matter, because this is about something so much more important. I mean, I saw an article the other day that said this is going to be as big, or if not slightly smaller, than the Nuremberg trial. I mean, this is very, very big, Rainer.
Yes, there cannot be any doubt whatsoever, at least not for me, after having interviewed so many experts from all different fields of science, doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, economists, lawyers, psychologists, psychiatrists. Just today, we interviewed, I think, 4 highly renowned psychologists. There cannot be any doubt whatsoever that what has been happening here for a year now is, when I first said this, some people kind of rolled their eyes and said, hey, nobody's going to ever agree with you. But this is the worst, these are the worst crimes against humanity ever committed. This is worse than what happened in World War II and, of course, in World War I. What's even worse is that so many people are participating in this, the same type of people who participated some 80 years ago in what was then going to be World War II. I'm not just saying this, I'm quoting this from Vera Sharaf, who is a Holocaust survivor. We interviewed her a couple of weeks ago, and she said, this is so incredible. I would never, she was a child then, she was in Auschwitz. And she said, this is so incredible. I would never have believed that I'm once again going to have to fight the very same people whom I fought 80 years ago or 75 years ago.
And who are those people?
Those are, well, back then it was the Nazis, of course, but mainly the ones who were instrumental in helping the Nazis with their terrible goals were the medical doctors. Just like today, not all of them, of course, but I'd say 80 or 90% of the doctors, not just here in Germany, but in most other countries as well. I'm not talking about every country, because there's a distinct difference between those countries that are under the influence of the West, where this is really, this whole game plan is really being rolled out. So much pressure is being applied on the governments, or maybe they don't even have to apply any pressure on the governments anymore. But it's different in India and Africa, in other countries, where in many instances they have the very same rules, like mask mandates, but people don't care. So it is not, the plan doesn't quite seem to be working the way that they figured it would be working. You can see it from all these mistakes that are happening now.
But I mean, Rainer, come on. We all know that it's about a virus.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, right. No, we all know now. I mean, we should know. Those 10 or 20% of us who still have a brain to use and to think with, this has never been about the virus. This has never been about health. This has always been about taking everything away from us so that we would be dependent on them, plus population reduction, plus gaining complete control over those who are left. That is, I wouldn't have said this a year ago. A year ago, if you had asked me, or if somebody had told me this, I would have said, hey, you definitely need to see a doctor. But no, this is what all the evidence, all of the people who we interviewed on the Corona Committee, what this points to. This conclusion is inevitable.
Jennifer in the comments says, I work for the NHS. I'm ashamed of my fellow staff. They don't ask questions.
That's very, very smart. You know what? One of the psychologists who we talked to, he's one of the most impressive people whom I've ever talked to. His name is, he's now a professor emeritus, Lind is his name. And he says, in order for a democracy to work, you need people with moral competence. Moral competence, in turn, requires two things. One, the ability to ask questions as opposed to simply blindly following orders. And two, the ability to discuss different opinions rather than killing the person who has a different opinion than yourself. Those are the two most important elements for a functioning democracy, and it's called moral competence. And he says probably only 20% of the people on this planet have this kind of moral competence. I don't quite agree with that, because I think that this is probably true for the so-called civilized countries, but in many of the not so civilized countries, I think the percentage of people with a moral competence is much higher.
Let's get slightly more technical, but not too technical, because we don't want to scare away people like me who are not legally minded, but are on your side. Okay, so what is this case about? I know that it's a tort case, which is essential a civil case, and it's going to be, I suspect, from what I understand, the largest in the world, actually ever. Or second largest, something to that effect.
Well, you know, the thing is that this, when we talk about a class action lawsuit, it's not just one. Thus far, one has been filed in Canada, another one is on its way to be filed, and we're planning to file a couple of more. We means the colleagues, my Anglo-American colleagues, because I'm just one of the people who is trying to put together the evidence by filing many other lawsuits, many other individual lawsuits, for example, in Germany, in order to get the courts to say Drosten is lying to you. The Drosten PCR test and all the others, which used his test as a blueprint.
Let's stop there. Yeah, sorry. Before you go on, let's just quickly deal with that, because a lot of people don't know what the Drosten paper is. Now, I know what it is, but a lot of people don't. It's that paper that the WHO approved within 48 hours at the beginning of 2020, recommending PCR globally. Am I right?
That's pretty much correct. What happened at the beginning of 2020, actually, he claims that he did his work on New Year's Eve. Maybe it was on December the 31st. I don't know. What happened is, while everyone, including Drosten is a professor, Dr. Drosten of Charité University, which is one of the most important university hospitals in Germany, in Berlin. At the beginning of January, all the way up through the middle of March, he and others were telling the general population that there's nothing to worry about. This is going to be like the flu. Most people won't even have any symptoms. Don't worry. However, at the very same time he was saying this, he was working hard on this PCR test, on his PCR test version. Because the original PCR test was, of course, invented by a really smart person, as opposed to Drosten, a guy by the name of Kary Mullis, an American who won a Nobel Prize for this. And he kept telling the world that his PCR test is great because it does an incredible trick. It makes things visible that are not visible to the human eye by amplifying it.